Welcome to LOA Today. I'm Walt Jason.
With me today is life coach and LOA teacher Joel Elston.
This is your daily dose of happy. We are so happy you decided to join us today. Now, this is the third time I've tried to bring a guest on who was on the podcast about a month and a half ago, named Brittany Sandoval, because I want her and you, Joel, to have a conversation because you both have that background in foster families.
Sure.
It's also the third time that's failed. I'm thinking maybe this is not the time to bring that topic in for some reason. Maybe the universe is saying, save that one for further on down the line.
Yeah, when we plan something and instead of just forcing it over and over, the third time it didn't work. So we will table that until the future. It might make more sense later on, I guess.
It almost always does, actually.
It does. There could be something really relevant down the road. So one thing, that I'm very clear about that I've told everyone, including, I haven't told you yet, Walt, but you're a dear friend too. So if I ever mention adopting another child, you are to drive down here and take a baseball bat and beat me upside the head. Okay?
I hear you. I hear you.
So I'm just saying, grateful for my kids, but after 3, that was, wow.
That was enough.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. 3 is enough. If you want to know the number that's enough, it's 3.
Well, 3 apparently is the actual number because our guest just arrived. She's in the green room right now.
Oh, good.
Let's bring
Excellent.
her on.
Okay.
So here she is. Hey, Britt. How you doing?
Hey, good. How are you guys?
Good. Hey. I wasn't honestly sure if you got the email, so I'm glad you got it. That's fabulous.
Yeah. Sorry, I was just running a few minutes behind from my last appointment today.
That's all right. No problem. We're glad to have you. So Britt, meet Joel. Joel, meet Britt.
Hey, how you doing?
Hi. Good. How are you?
Good. Thank you.
And of course, the reason I wanted you to come onto the show, Brittany, is because you and Joel share the whole foster family experience in common from different perspectives. I mean, you both have been in that system, but from different points of view. So why don't you just share with Joel what your experience is? I'm sure Joel will jump in with his, and I'll probably be sitting pretty quiet for a lot of this, but I'll jump in as needed,
Yeah, definitely. So I've been a foster mom for about almost 3 years now. We've had the opportunity to have 13 wonderful kids in our home over the last few years. And then we are actually finalizing adoption for our youngest little guy who's been with us about 2 years on the 21st. So wow. Yeah. Definitely not. We didn't ever get into fostering to adopt. We got into just foster and have a safe home for kiddos. Growing up, my cousins were in foster care, but my family was really unable to help them because we were struggling ourselves, which is it's pretty common in the foster community. And so I had to watch my cousins go through the foster care system. And it was just really hard to watch some of the difficult things that they experienced in various foster homes. And so I wanted to be able to be that safe space for kids when I had the means to. And so that's kind of how it all worked out.
Which is cool. And then Joel has a little bit of a different experience, although his was also, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, Joel, but you kind of also got into it through the back door. It wasn't something that you planned.
Yeah, it's a very long backstory, but the relevant part, I was doing some volunteer work in South Carolina for a foster care to adopt system of sort of that's all they did. It was really cool. So I was doing some volunteer work, training some parents. My background's in mental health, and I'd experienced a lot of addiction and recovery in my personal life. So I had actually, part of the unfortunate consequence of my addiction, I was convicted of a felony for theft, and several years before that. So I just assumed I could never, ever adopt or foster, but I was volunteering and helping out. And so they approached me, the people, one time. They said, look, we have a young man. He's 10 years old, and he's been in 24 foster care placements in a 17-month period.
Wow.
And they said, we're not being dramatic, but tomorrow he's heading to the state hospital at 11, and state hospital, you don't get out, kind of thing. It's once you're in, you're ruined for life. And so they just approached me and said, would you consider foster care? And I'm like, okay, single male, convicted felon. I'm not high on the list of people that they go, you're sort of the person of last resort, and we could get waivers for all that. You know, my crime was not against any children, obviously.
Right.
And I had turned my life around drastically at that point. I hadn't been practicing addiction for a long, long time at that point. So I agreed, and he came into my home. He was absolutely wild. He couldn't read. Had been through pure hell, and so the first day, he's just going off and screaming and cussing at me. And the funny story too. In the middle of one of those, he called me a whole ass instead of an asshole. Which, if you knew me at all, I laugh at. I'm a humor guy, so. After his 15-minute rant, he basically said, he goes, "I guess you want me to get my shit and get out of your house too." And I go, "No, but when you get home, I want to teach you how to cuss properly, because none of that shit made sense." And so it was like that moment. He sort of looked at me like, "Can you say that?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I can say." So anyway, I got very fortunate. I don't take anything personally. He thrived, and I eventually adopted him, and it was an amazing story. And then I went on to adopt another child, and then unfortunately, TJ, the one I was speaking about, was killed in a car wreck when he was 23. Yeah, and that was just horrible. He'd done so well with his life, and it just made no sense. And a few years after his death, at how old was I? Well, 58. They approached me to do it foster care one more time, and I adopted that child. And he's Justin. He's with me now. He adopted him at 11. He's 18 now, and he's your normal crazy 18-year-old kid. So. Where, a little different approach of how we got there, but it was certainly something, and I've become a major advocate for kids in foster care. Once I understood how screwed up the system was, that these children are on. I do pro bono work with foster care kids in my life coaching business, just because they usually, and this sounds elitist, and I apologize if it does, they usually end up with the worst therapist, because they only take the basic Medicaid. And so these therapists that couldn't get a job anywhere else are the ones dealing with these kids, and they just the psychiatrists that end up with them, they just prescribe ridiculous amounts of medication. I mean, malpractice amounts of medication. And so I realized these kids, they don't have an advocate. They're silently suffering. They're sitting back there. Everybody assumes they're fine. Thank God there's people like you out there, but you're not, in my experience, you're not the majority. And there's some people that do it because, hey, we'll get an extra $800 a kid or whatever it is they get. Some people do it because they're pedophiles, to be honest with you. There's some people that do it but there's a few people do it for the right reason. And I have recruited people to adopt 33 kids from foster care over the last, several, years. And it's one of those, it's the most underrepresented population that I'm aware of. Everybody talks about, this group or that group, but foster care kids have no voice. And if the average person knew what took place in foster care, there would be an uproar, but it's easier just to ignore it.
Yeah, definitely. I think that was honestly what I say all the time. I've gotten so passionate about, social justice and just helping individuals. And it's given me an entirely different perspective on people that I even come in contact with on a daily basis. You look at homeless levels and how many high percentage of those individuals were kids who aged out of foster care who didn't have resources. I recently saw a meme, and it was like, 90% of people that have a go back to their parents phase in their life, those kids without parents or without solid foundational systems, those are the people that end up on the streets. And it's a systemic wide long-term problem that these kids they go through broken, difficult, traumatic things. They don't get the resources that they need. Oftentimes, the foster parents that are in it for the right reasons aren't getting the resources they need. So they don't stay open for very long because the system is not good to them. And then it's just this recurrent thing. And then kids are then launched into group homes or shelter settings and are still not given any of the resources to succeed. And then they age out and they end up addicted to drugs and they end up in trouble and creating doing criminal acts just to survive. And often those are then turned into criminal offenses and those kids end up in the system. And it's just this over and over and over cycle. And until you're working with that population and seeing eye level what that looks like and how little resources there are, I really feel like you're blind to a lot of the hurt and heartbreak that's happening in our country, because that is such a population and it feels every level of systemic oppression.
Absolutely. And it's this idea that you're going to take a child, you're going to place them with people they don't know, and hopefully they get the good ones. But if they don't, they get passed around like my son TJ was in the multiple homes. And to be fair, he was living up to his diagnosis. He was behaving exactly like so. An average couple, to be fair, like this child is wild, and he just so the most people end up when I was a therapeutic foster parent, meaning the term, but I had a lot of support for the agency that I work with. So it wasn't just me. My neighbors got approved as well to be able to help. And so I had like a community of support. I wasn't just a single dad with, I had a community of support, plus the agency was very supportive. They would help with doctor's appointments and all that. So I had a team of people and it was still very hard. And so somebody that goes, at least I'm in Virginia. So in our state, if you go through a therapeutic foster placement, there's a lot more support than going straight through the state where you basically get zero support. Our foster care workers, I assume most of them are good people. I know one lady said she had 63 kids on her caseload, and she's required to make a face-to-face visit with each kid and do reports and do all that stuff with each of them. And she said, that's more than 2 a day if I'm not working every day. It's just, and having to do it. It's just an absurd amount of work for the poor caseworkers. So the system itself is there. So that, so I tend to take on underdog cases anyway. So I'm a big advocate for our kids and just the average foster care kid is on something like 6 medications. That psychotropic medications often are 10-year-olds are placed on things that aren't supposed to be for 10-year-olds. Again, you have nobody advocating for these kids, so a doctor literally can perform malpractice by doing that, and nobody says anything about that. And no parent is going to allow that to happen. A foster parent's told to shut up and just accept it, and and it's just this that you see the system and you see the effects on the kids and the outcomes for kids that age out of foster care, as you were mentioning. If you look at the numbers, they're horrific. It just is horrific.
Yeah, definitely. It's so interesting, when you talk about medications and, how foster parents are a lot more likely to let those types of things happen. And I think a large part of it is foster parents' loads are just also asinine because of the lack of support. We're an enhanced foster care home, so kind of one step up from the regular foster care, but not quite full therapeutic for anybody who doesn't know the kind of levels. And even we had to fight for enhanced foster care for our current kiddo that we had. And I had to fight for 8 months to finally be able to get the support that we needed. And that was with me vocally advocating every single day that this needed to be happening and trying to push paperwork. And there's a lot of foster parents where, especially when you have multiple kids, I've had 4 placements, 4 kids at once, foster, and then I have 3 bio of my own. So I've had 7 total at once. And when you start to get to that level, which you so often see foster families get to, we only had that placement for 6 months because it got to the point where I knew I couldn't advocate well enough for all of the kids that I needed to in my care. And when you talk about caseworker loads being the same way, it's not that the system is full of really bad people. I mean, there are some not so great people, but a lot of it is these really great people that aren't getting the support that they need. And then we just see over and over these cuts to programs that are helping support foster families. And it's absolutely devastating because like I said, so many foster homes will close their doors even after 1 or 2 placements because of just the absolute immense level of difficulty with such little support.
Absolutely. And there's family, I've talked to families that have closed their home and they're worried about liability, the lack of training, lack of support, getting some very disordered children. And they're told it's not reflected in the report. It's just, there's all kinds of stuff going on. I had one of my favorite cases, and Walt and I talk about this one a lot. I had a caseworker reach out to me, and she had a young man that she said, Joel, this kid is great. He's been stuck in the system. His foster mom's a decent lady, but she has 3 other kids there. He's hell on wheels, but his mom died while he was in foster care, and he's just stuck in the system. And his therapist, and he's over medicated, and nobody will listen. And he said, she said, I can't make anything happen. Will you work with him? So I did. And this was a brilliant little guy. He was 12 when I first saw him. And, he was very, very engaging, very smart. You could tell, little tiny guy too. His feet wouldn't touch that time feet wouldn't touch the ground. So, and he had this just really some power energy toward him. And so we were hitting it off, and I was just telling him about, so I have a sort of a different strategy. So I just sort of ask a lot of questions, and I'll play dumb when I need to play dumb. And so he was telling me, I said, well, tell me about what's going on. And he goes, I'm in foster care. And I go, oh, why are you? And I knew all the answers, but I said, so why are you in foster care? He said, well, my mom got in trouble and she went to jail and she was killed in jail. And I'm here. And I said, oh, okay. I said, I'm really sorry to hear that. That's terrible. So we kept talking, and I said, well, why do you think you're here? And he said, because I'm wild. I'm oppositionally defiant. I'm blah. And he named like 5 diagnoses that he was living up to those diagnoses. By the way, I'm not a fan of diagnosis, but that's a whole different concept. So as we were doing this, we were going through it. I said, okay, so you're depressed. I said, what does that mean? Again, I'm asking the question. He said, well, they say I have like a brain deficiency or something, and I take medication. He said, I take Prozac. I said, does it help? And he goes, I don't think so. And so we're just talking about why he's depressed. And so he finally gets really frustrated with me. And he said, I'm depressed because my mom died and I'm in foster care. And I go, well, to be honest, that's sort of normal to be depressed in your mom. I'm sorry it happened. But I said, but the part I'm confused about is, what does Prozac have to do with your mom being dead and you're in foster care? And his little brain started clicking, and he goes, I said, so if you're depressed because of that, does Prozac make that better? And he had this awakening. So I basically convinced him. I said, look, you've been told all this stuff about you, and you're literally acting that way. I said, so you can keep acting that way, or you can change the narrative, and you're very bright. Something clicked in him. And he went back to home, and he apologized to his foster mom. And he told this hilarious. She called me and he said he's told her, I'm no longer oppositionally defiant. And so he just changed his whole demeanor. He went to school the next day, asked the teacher if he could move to the front of the class because he apologized for being disruptive. And he literally changed his perspective overnight. He asked me to go to a psychiatrist appointment with him, and he literally fired his psychiatrist after his psychiatrist couldn't explain why he was on 6 different medications, and none of them addressed why he was in foster care. And so 2 years after that, he was adopted of this wonderful family. He graduated this year, and he's thriving. And all of that was that's one child. And what he believed about himself was, every time he would get upset, they gave him another medication instead of saying, buddy, you should be crying anyway. You should be crying. Your mom died. You're in foster care. We love you. We want to, but nobody ever did that. They said, he just needs more medication. And every diagnosis he had, he was oppositionally defiant, but not in a clinical sense. He was oppositionally defiant because he believed that was what he's supposed to be. That's what he was.
Right.
And he has no diagnosis. He has a little ADHD, but he wants to learn air condition repair and heating repair. So his parents are sending him to school for that. So he's thriving, but that's just one kid. That's one intervention on one kid. How many kids are out there? That's the problem. And they all slip by the crack. Not everybody, caseworkers are going to find somebody who will see that kid for free because I don't take Medicaid. So you have to find that right combination. And it's just unfortunate that the system is set up that way, that it's there, but it's just not really helpful.
Mm-mm. No. I mean, especially too, we know that the entire point of foster care is to help reunify families and to rehabilitate families. And honestly, it's become kind of a for-profit baby mill in some circumstances.
Yes.
And it's really, really sad. And it makes my heart break for these kids who are just at the mercy and expense of these difficult circumstances. And we just push them out into a world without any of the resources that they need. And it's really devastating.
It really is. And it's a system that perpetuates itself. One of the things when Justin, my youngest, when I adopted him I adopted my first two in South Carolina and moved to Virginia for a job. So and Justin was adopted up here. And one of the things that I found fascinating is when we got to the place of negotiating the stipend, where you sit there. So I'm in wonderful financial shape. I told them I didn't even really need it. And, but I would take it and put it back for him. You know what I mean? So that's what I was doing with it. So they were asking me these questions and I said, he's a great kid. And they go, you need to make him sound worse. And I go, but he's not. And they go, but the more you do, there's a higher tier by the more if he's on more medication or he has I go, but he's really he's not all that anyway. And I don't want to. So I ended up with the minimum stipend, which I didn't care, but the system was set up to present the child as more defective or broken than he was to get more money. That just the conflict in that, how many parents are negotiating down? I was negotiating look, I don't want it, but it's going to come. Just give me the minimum amount. I'll put it back for him. And we used that money to buy his first car, actually.
I love that.
So, yeah. So it was, it worked well. And there's still some left over that we're going to put toward whatever he needs. But the idea that we are going to monetize the more defective or the more, disordered your child is, it's a recipe for disaster.
Yeah, absolutely. It absolutely is. And it's such a disservice to those children too, because the kids that do make it out of the system, even with decent foster parents, a lot of those kids are going to carry that narrative into adulthood and struggle with self-worth and self-esteem. And even if they are able to get to a successful point in life, a lot of the kids are going to have long-term mental health issues. And unless we are making sure that even as adults, those kids know how to seek their own resources and advocate for themselves, we're still setting them up for success or for failure to get out there. And if they are unable to voice that for themselves. So I think there's a really, hard balance, but such a needed balance in that where we are doing the work for our children and advocating for them, but we're also helping them to see how to do it for themselves. And that is the best gift that we can give them as they age out.
I completely agree. And particularly with your point that as they need, this is traumatic child, automatically, if you've been in foster care, you've experienced a very high level of trauma. So most of them are dealing with, post-traumatic stress syndrome minimally without other things. I know my two youngest, TJ, the wild one, he was hell on wheels for 2 or 3 years. And he got his stuff out of the way, did really well, got things going. So he ended up fine. My middle son, Chris, is still struggling greatly. He's 25. He he just has it. He's chasing. He always ends up with, like 10-year older women that are very inappropriate. So he's looking for that connection. He literally, he's in Missouri right now because he met some lady online, and it's this horrible situation. I'm like, son, you've done this 5 times, and it's sad. But in my son Justin, who literally was, in fact, it concerned me because he was doing so well without any blips, and they turned 18, and we've had a few things going on, which which is expected. These are traumatic things that will carry on probably for the rest of their life. So, the idea that it's you just get them to 18 and everything's fine, it's not. Because it's all of us. I mean, I don't know anybody goes through life without having scarring and childhood stuff, and but this was very intense to be ripped from your family, and you have to navigate that, and we don't. The system, for the most part, doesn't allow for you turn 18 and pretty much everything's shut down.
Yeah. I mean, and even when you look at like statistics for kids who are even adopted out of foster care from very, very young ages,
Yes.
that, a lot of people will think like, oh, I adopted a kid when he was 2, or I adopted a newborn baby, and so I got them before they had too much trauma. But I think it's so important that, like, regardless of age of foster care, that separation from a biological parent at any age, and especially as a newborn, even more so, is traumatic on the brain and will be a part of that child forever. And so, I think for all foster parents and all adoptive parents, it's so important that we're making sure to help these kids be connected to who they truly are and their pasts. Because a lot of times I feel like when kids come into foster homes, especially if there are other kids in the home, there's a lot of worry about like trauma, like traumatic situations spreading to other kids, right? Or we don't talk about the traumatic situations that you were in, or that was at your old house, but we don't do that now, or we don't talk about that. And we so often kind of shut down and shun the experiences that these kids have had, and turned even their memories of their very core experiences into bad experiences. And so these kids, even if they're adopted at 2-3 years old, those kids are still just as high risk as they are older and as they age up to have those issues. And I think even those kids are so high risk that we need to be educating at a better level for foster parents and all foster parents, but also for kids, and making sure that there are resources and options out there for kids who are going through this. And I love so much that you're doing that on a daily basis, because it's such a crucial resource.
Well, the kids are, and great point, by the way, the attachment disorders that come with, almost anyone that's been adopted or been through foster care is, the science, when you don't realize that, the bonding that takes place, at birth, and that without that being there, you're constantly looking to bond to something. And, culturally, you're sent to all different kind of cultures, and you have to adapt to the cultures of the family. Your culture is lost in that. One thing that I always allowed, as long as it remained appropriate, all of my kids had access to their families, and I did not limit that. If one of them got drunk and said stuff, I said, no, we're not going to do that. My oldest son, TJ, he had, when he turned 18, he decided that he wanted to go live with them for a little while. And, and I said, I certainly would, you're 18, I can't stop you, but I'll still help out. I'll still keep your insurance in place and all that, and pay for your phone. And so after about a month there, he goes, these people are crazy. Can I come home? And I go, I'm sorry. He was just, it's very upset that he had this image of what they would have been like. And so that was actually very helpful for him to go back and realize they're just a bunch of, that sounds evil, but they're people dealing with their own addiction and mental illness. And they just were pretty much hadn't moved since he understood the reason he was taken at that time. So in some ways for TJ, that was one of the biggest things he could see is I said, well, you saw their lifestyle, you lived my lifestyle. And, he said, while we're there, the electricity got cut off. He said, never living with you was our electricity. He said, I didn't even realize that could happen until I went with these people. And that's what he kept calling them, these people. So he's just, you're right. And that when people don't understand, you could adopt a 1 month old baby and assume none of that's there, but just it's there. And I see families a lot. I worked with a lot of families that adopt kids, especially and I know this even gets into a deeper realm, but there's a lot of babies adopted from Russia several years ago, and they are, wow. I mean, they have way off the chart, and most of them, they end up in institutions, and it's just this because of the
severe, like reactive attachment.
Yes.
It's really, it's mind blowing. And I think that was something like we got our son a month before he turned 2. And so like we've gotten multiple comments about like, oh, you're so lucky you got him before all the real like trauma. And I'm like, oh no.
No.
And I'm like, it's difficult because we're dealing with trauma with a child that can't express why or understand why, and he doesn't necessarily remember why he feels that way. And I'm like, it's a different level of communication and understanding. And so I think it's so important that any child that comes out of the system or has touched the system is getting those resources, because it
Absolutely.
does. It permanently changes the way the brain is structured forever.
And even with the best of the best help, it is a very difficult condition to treat. A reactive attachment disorder. That's definitely my middle son, and he cannot attach, and he keeps searching for somebody to attach to, and it just the same result keeps happening. It's very sad to watch. And when they're 25, you can't make them do anything. So. Nope. Keep offering and keep helping, but it's just it's a sad state. Now the good news is there are people out there advocating. There are people that are changing the narrative, but the system is, I have a hard time. I tell people I have a hard time going to bed knowing kids don't have homes in our country with all our wealth and all we have going on. Now the problem is they say, well, what could be the solution? That's the big question, because it's even if we were unlimited resources, obviously the help we're talking about, it's still, there's no good answer, even with but without the resources, it's far worse. But right. There's just not a lot of caring people out there that can really understand, be willing to put up with, just the verbal abuse and the stuff that's going to come when you're dealing with these kids a lot of times, and people who aren't emotionally healed themselves are not going to be able to handle this. I have when I was volunteering before I adopted, we had a couple. I would do the orientation and ask questions and stuff like that. So, and figure out, and then I would just give my opinion, yes or no or whatever. And they would go review it. And so this couple came in, and I asked the reason why they were considering foster to adopt. And, they said, yeah, we've been having some trouble in our marriage, and I think that would be a really good way to help us bond.
Oh dear.
And I said, no, it'll be a very good way to speed up your divorce. So why don't you, I'll tell you ahead of time, you're not going to get approved just because you said that. But I said, I really suggest you do a lot of deep work if you ever want to reapproach this on the other side of the work you did. But the strongest marriages in the world are almost pulled apart by these events. Mm-hmm. In some ways, and it's always optimal to have two healthy parents, obviously, whenever possible. But in my particular case with my kids, only having one parent, actually a strong parent, it actually was beneficial because we didn't have the splitting, and it was just, it really sort of worked out well. And, I was getting them at 10 or 11. So I'm not saying a mom mind wouldn't have been great in that equation, right. But I am saying for us, it was sort of like, I didn't have to deal with a lot of stuff what a lot of married couples are going through. Well, he said this and I said this, and the kids are split. There's nobody to split in my house. So it was a lot easier to be, I'm very consistent. I'm very, that's what works, consistency and safety. And it's easier for me to be consistent if I'm the only person having to be consistent.
Yeah, Definitely. It was interesting. So when we started fostering, my husband is actually in the military, and he's deployed about 70% of the time the first 2 years that we were fostering. And it was, everybody's like, oh, how do you do it by yourself? How do you do it by yourself? But honestly, in a way, like, doing it by yourself is easier. There's only
I agree.
one person for them to go to. You're only counting on yourself. Like, what's going to get done is what's going to get done. And there were definitely some pros. I think, now for us specifically with my son, my foster son, well, he's not going to be my foster son for much longer, so I'm not going to say that anymore. But my son had really difficult with attachment, and it was a big time. And honestly, when my husband came home, and he's been home now consistently for like 8 months, it was interesting just how much like a male presence made a difference as well too. And so I think that also probably plays a part when you're taking, these older boys, especially, to have a strong, stable, consistent male figure to model for them is truly huge and monumental. And I think it's amazing to see people who are doing the single foster parent thing. And I think it teaches kids too a healthy level of independence. I find that like a lot of these kids in foster homes, they come from really unhealthy codependent type relationships, really toxic relationships, whether that's because of addiction or just domestic abuse. But there's usually a really unhealthy level of codependency and toxicity in the relationships. And when we're teaching these kids that as an independent and single adult, I can find my happiness and my fulfillment in myself, and I don't need validation from external circumstances because I am happy with who I am by myself, and I don't need that validation. I think it's such a crucial skill that we're teaching kids, and something that we really need to be teaching kids in foster care because they didn't get that model of what a healthy relationship looks like.
Yes, and that's and that's a bigger concept for all children, actually. In today's world, and but foster care kids, there's another side to them that I admire so much. They're incredibly resilient, especially when you report. I point that out. Look what you've gone through. Look, and I'm a very pro. Growth mindset. I point out to them, like, look, there's nobody your age at your school that has been through what you've been through. Look what you've done with all this. And I point out the resilience model. I point out, and just that works a lot of times. That helps a lot with, I really admire you as a person, because a lot of people can't handle it. Look what you're doing. And like that young man I was talking about, when he, turned his grades around, he turned his behavior literally overnight, basically. That's a mark of, he made more of a change in life than I've ever seen. I've worked in this industry, in the field, forever, and I've never seen anybody change as quickly as that. He just made up his mind, I'm not doing this. And he just literally willed his way to become this incredible young man. And he bought into the concept that the narrative that was written about him was wrong, and he got to choose his own narrative, and he created this incredible, almost superhero-like narrative, and he's just thriving.
Yeah. So that's actually, I had talked to Walt about this a little bit last time, but this is what I do now. I'm actually a public speaker, and I talk to audiences in various ways, from students all the way up to young adults and professionals, about, I call it the 4 A's to unlocking abundance, but it's essentially all of that. It's learning how to kind of reconnect with ourselves and learn those parts of us, but also accept those parts of ourselves, and understanding that those are pieces of ourselves that will always be there, but then learning tools to help us navigate and align our action with what we want. And it's not necessarily dismissing or pretending that those difficult things didn't happen to us, or dismissing or pretending that those didn't impact us. But unless we're able to really kind of connect and, see how that impacts our actions, are we able to switch and change that narrative in our head into an authentic and living in our authenticity of who we truly are, and not what society has told us of. And it's so amazing. I talk about this with foster kids, and ultimately my book, I'm writing a book right now. It's actually 3. I'm writing one that teaches just adults how to kind of go through this by themselves, because in the multiple last generations, connection with emotion and understanding how to process our own emotion, or even being allowed to feel emotion was not really acceptable. And so a lot of us as parents, foster parents, bio parents, leaders at work, we're getting into these type of leadership type roles, and we're not even able to connect to our needs. So we're unable to connect to the people we're managing, whether that's our children or our teams at work or whatnot. And so the books are that. And then one I'm writing is for reparenting yourself and kind of reparenting your inner child while you're parenting. And then I'm working on one that's a workbook type version for teens, teaching them these basic steps and tools that, and I would love to turn it into like a nonprofit and get it into shelters and teen group homes, specifically where these kids who have been through difficult circumstances and need these tools, but maybe don't have access to somebody stable and able to teach them this in real life, just to give them a footing off, to at least they have something in their hands that they can start to build this relationship with themselves and this.
Can you hear me, Walt?
Yeah.
Okay, well, apparently she froze up, but she'll be back in a second. These things normally pop right back. But I want to continue. What she's speaking about is amazing stuff, because the reframing, the reprogramming of this internal dialogue, seeing things differently, it's such an amazing concept what she's presenting, because often the people that are here to be in control, so to speak, that are in charge, are the ones that are not healed themselves. So, I mean, it's a really good point she made, that a lot of
these things in my head.
that was the end, as it was trying to connect and gave up.
Yeah, so she'll be back. But but it's such a difficult world that these kids live in. So, but changing the narrative for them, helping them see their strength. And are you back?
I'm back. Sorry, that was super weird.
It was very weird, because you went into this almost Matrix type. It was very odd, but you're here. So I love what you were saying.
Joel actually finished off your point beautifully, but you feel free to expand on it.
Yeah, no, I was just saying, we can be aware of all of these parts of ourselves all day, but if you are aware of them as being a difficult part of you or a burden to others, because that's what you've told those parts of you are for so long, unless you're able to really look at those parts of you and say, like, no, actually that's not who I am, and that maybe is an action that I'm taking because it's a habit and not because it's actually how I feel, you can then start to really change that mindset. And I think if we're just able to get people of all areas to be able to kind of start to embrace and accept those parts of themselves and live in their authenticity and take action based on how they truly feel and meeting their needs, we really do set people up for a lifetime of success for that way, Completely
agree. I have, when I was younger, they didn't have a diagnosis of ADHD. As Walt will point out, I am probably the king of ADHD. So
you look up ADHD in the manual, right? The DMV manual, and Joel's pictures right there.
Yeah. So I struggled in school. They kept telling me how smart I was, but clearly they kept telling me I'm lazy and unmotivated, and they gave me all that dialogue. And somewhere and I did hate school, and it was terrible, because everything they were saying, well, you're not wrong, but it was. Nobody had ever realized that, my brain cannot, especially during the teen years, I couldn't focus. I had the attention span of a gnat, it was just this, there was just nothing I could, stick with. And along the way, none of this was taught to me, but along the way, as my prefrontal cortex fully developed, which for males can be as late as 30. But as it started to develop, I realized, wait a minute, I learned differently. And so I really understood how my brain worked. And I started, now I really am an advocate for looking at your ADHD as used properly. It's a superior brain. It is, I went and got a doctorate in metaphysics at really bad in school. And there's not a lot harder than doctors in doctorate in metaphysics, So it was this amazing discovery that my brain was there was never a deficiency. In fact, I don't believe in the, attention deficit disorder does it. We have an abundance of attention. That's the problem. We can't control it. You take one of my 13-year-old guys and, one of my clients with ADHD, he can play Fortnite for 7 straight days if you let him, and not get up and take a shower or pee. He could, but asking him to read some little piece of literature oh my God, I can't, So it's learning to use the power of the hyper focus to your advantage, and also realizing I'm going to have to manage this. Like I listen to a lot of Audible books, a lot, and I discovered what Audible allows you to do is you can increase the speed of how they play it back. So this works great for ADHD people in general. So I listen to it at twice the speed. And I absorb it so much better because
I've heard that actually by multiple people with ADHD. I have ADHD and I can't do audiobooks. I get too distracted in my brain on other things that I can physically see. But I've heard that listening to it faster does help. Yeah.
And there's I'll listen to, I'll listen to it double speed, and I retain so much. And it's just, and a lot of my clients, one of the things I do with my ADHD clients who, generally aren't foster care kids because we're dealing with other things with them. But, I'm very much, I go into IEPs all the time with like, look, we need this kid's way of learning is this, and this. We're going to implement this. We're going to do that. And really just focusing on their style of learning. And it all applies the same way. But so much of this, the resilient side of these kids in foster care, their survival instincts, when they're allowed to say, in my opinion, look how strong you are. I sell them on their strength, how street smart you are, and how my son TJ, and when I got him when he was in 5th grade, and when I say he couldn't read, I am not kidding. He could not read. And we found it turns out to be a very good friend to this day. His 5th grade teacher, her name is Joanna Setzler, and she instantly took a liking to TJ. And she sat down every day after school, and he spent an hour with him every day practicing reading. I would take him over to her house on weekends. She would play games with him, practice reading. They became approved as well to be able to keep him. So it was like almost having another mom or a grandmother or something there, and they went through it. Within 6 months, this is unheard of. Doctors told me this wasn't possible. TJ could not read at any level. And in 6 months, he was reading at a 7th grade level.
Wow.
Yeah. So most 6th graders can't read at a 5th grade level. So, and just statistically, so he's reading at a 7th grade level. So the narrative that he had that somehow he's stupid or broken, once he understood that's not a clear narrative, he was able to rewrite that internal dialogue that supported that, and he became a different person.
Yeah.
And
there's something I want to interject here, because you've touched on one of my favorite topics, to be perfectly honest. The ability of children to learn a whole lot better than what the educational system believes they can do. And there's a lot of evidence about that. We could do an entire show on that. We actually have done an entire show on that. Now that I think about it. But along with that, I'm thinking about one of my childhood friends growing up. He was my best friend for a number of years, and he was adopted. And as you guys were describing earlier, you were discussing the attachment issues. I felt like I was hearing about him and understanding him for the first time. I mean, this is the last time I saw him was probably 50 years ago, something like that, 49, 50 years ago. But for the first time in my life, I actually have an understanding of him I didn't have before because of this discussion. So, I mean, very naturally, you guys earlier on, you were asking the question, is there anything that can be done about this? The whole thing's broken. You're laying out the case beautifully. I realized one of the first things that can be done, you don't even have to necessarily be somebody who's going to be an adopter. One of the first things you can do is to understand. Because chances are everybody listening to this podcast, most people in the world know somebody at some fairly important level who's either been in foster care or adopted that they didn't understand. This helps people to understand. Understanding is probably one of the most important first steps we can take.
It is a crucial first step because it begins pre-action, understanding, the stages of change. It's a concept. This is sort of the contemplative. I'm understanding now, and so we'll be able to, and that's why what I love what you're doing, educating people, explaining that, and you're speaking, because that's such a need, because the average person has no idea this is going on. As we were saying earlier, most people have, you were adopted when you were 1, so you're you shouldn't feel that way, but yet they do. So it's this idea, and I'm also, for all my people, no matter where they're from or what their thing is, the most important thing in my belief system is the internal dialogue we have with ourselves on a daily basis, and most of us go through during my addictive time when I lost everything and went to jail and did all that. My inner dialogue was evil. It was bad. It was, I was useless, and I had this, and my results matched that dialogue in life. And when I discovered the law of attraction, which is how Walt and I got connected and how that sort of works, I really work on people's internal dialogue, that inner monologue, where you're just simply reframing every time you have that negative thought. And foster care kids have the worst internal dialogue you could ever possibly imagine. So that's one of the first things I start working on, is every cell in your body is listening to what you're thinking and feeling. And so the idea that we got to intervene on that. And there's I've seen miracles happen by just rechanging that dialogue. And it does it, since it's stored in the subconscious brain, you don't have direct access to it. You can't stop the thoughts for a while, but repetitive change and stopping it and reframing eventually makes you, I have a very positive internal dialogue now. It's not it's a law of attraction dialogue, and that it's reflected in every aspect of my life. Perfect health, great abundance. I love my life, and that's not something I do to sell my life coaching business. This is something that really changed everything for me. So that's why I always like to bring that concept to my kids, everybody I work with. And when you're living in all of this negativity, and that's all you can attract, and that's why they keep generationally redoing these same things. And so you got to break that. So I love where you're going with all this. I'm glad. I can't wait to read your books.
Right. And by the way, I want to interject one thing here too, for people who are new listeners, maybe haven't been listening for the longest time. When Joel says that he's not trying to promote his business, trust me when I say he has no need to. It's actually more a question of how many people can he keep out because they're just pounding on the door. It's that kind of a business that he has. So he's not being immodest there. He's just saying, I really don't need this.
No, it's what I believe. So a lot of people say, well, I've heard people say, well, you're not really that positive in real life. I really work. I'm not perfect. I have negative thoughts like every human being, but I reframe them instantly. I do a checklist of, if I don't leave the house without adjusting my mindset. So it's what I practice in my life. It's not part of my sales pitch of, hey, come work with me in life coaching. It's that I don't do that anymore. So
yeah. No,
when you say that, I just got to interject. When you say that, I laugh inside. I know how absurd it is.
Yeah. So that's what works. So, but again, you're that's why I love what you're doing. It's so incredible.
Well, thanks so much. I really appreciate it. I say so often that, like, when we look at studies that are done on self-worth, we actually start to see that infants have started to develop self-worth within the first 7 months of age, and specifically for kiddos in the foster system. But honestly, like, as a mom, bio mom myself, who struggled with severe postpartum anxiety and depression, those circumstances in those first few months can start to build a habit in your brain of, like, my needs aren't being met as a baby. As you're crying and your parents aren't coming. But then too, if they're not taking delight in those actions, if you're crying and your parent comes in and throws a pasty or a bottle at you, instead of picking you up and coddling and giving you your bottle, that sets the foundation. And then every time and every experience that you have after that, where you're not told that you're good enough, or it's literally like a brick on this wall where we're just kind of building this entire building of what we are thought we have been told that we should be our whole lives. And, when we really start to work at those, it's taking brick by brick. It's not going to be an instant shift. You have to take around the whole house, rebuild your whole foundation and start from the bottom. And it's a lot of work and it's hard work. And, you know, the younger that we can get to these kids, the more that we can teach people, even as adults, to understand, even just understanding this concept that we as humans are having to deconstruct our whole homes that we've built of who we've said that we are, in order to build something new and beautiful. It's a process, but it also gives you a different empathy for other humans, because when you can start to look at your experiences and ways that other people's actions have impacted you, but you can kind of look at it from a different angle of, like they might have been going through a lot too. You can kind of start to give yourself a different level of empathy and grace in every day that we do. And we can look back at our actions and say, you know what? I really screwed up. I made a bad choice, but I did the best with what I could at the time. And now I'm going to make a change for the next bigger, better thing. But unless we have an idea of how to do that, or we're taught how to do that, or you flounder your way through 10 years of living miserably as you figure it out on your own, it's hard. And if we can, that's what I'm trying to do with my books. And in there, I teach my storm tool, which is kind of my tool step by step to like take a difficult situation, and we break down each reactive emotion that is coming from that. And if we were to act on each of those emotions, how would that impact, the community below? And it is just an easy way, whether you're 50 or you're 15, to look at this model and say like, okay, this is what I'm struggling with. Why do I feel each of these emotions? And then I draw like a house or a tree. If you were to act on that emotion, what would happen in that way? And it just can start to help change those behaviors. And it's such an imperative thing to teach people, to just break it down by like, why am I feeling this way? And if I were to act on that, why? And so I think it's just such a huge tool. And I think you're doing that so much in your coaching and, teaching kids to reconnect with who they really are, not who they've been told that they are. And it's such an amazing gift to give so many people. And honestly, I think it's a gift that so many people across the generations at this point need, because it's a tough world out there. And it's being connected to yourself is really the only way, I think, to get through all of the difficult experiences of life, but still find that joy and happiness throughout it. So perfectly said. And that's the, as I, I grew up in chaos, addiction, mental health. I had an evening one night where my biological father, who was a compulsive gambler, took all of our money and we got kicked out of our house. So we went to live with my abusive alcoholic grandfather. So frying pan into the fire. Mm-hmm. So one night I was in the kitchen, and my grandfather usually was out of town during the week. He worked out of town and would come home the weekends. He usually was able to stay sober on the weekend. So we had a semblance of normalcy. Well, my grandfather shows up on a Tuesday night. I was 6 years old. And he comes in super drunk, demanding where his dinner is. And I'm in the kitchen with my mom, my grandmother's by the refrigerator. He shoves her up against the refrigerator, starts going off on everybody. Says, I'm going to kill you all. I want dinner on the table now. I then go to my Cub Scout meeting, and afterwards we're walking down the street with my mom packed a suitcase, me and my sister, she was 3, and we're waiting for one of her friends to pick us up. And I can remember being embarrassed for the first time in my life. Like, why are we walking with a suitcase with no car? People are looking at, and I just felt so bizarre. And the next morning I ended up going to school, and I had to learn multiplication or whatever I was learning at the time. So, I walk in and my brain's all over the place. I'm in a anxiety ridden state, and I'm watching the kid next to me go, I got a new puppy last night. And I go, well, I watched my grandfather beat my grandmother's ass. So, what are you doing? And so, the reason I tell the story is you all of that happens, all of that's stored. And I'm not, I have dealt with all that. I've worked on all that stuff, but that 6-year-old traumatic stuff, when you see it, it's hard. I mean, it's one of the reasons I fight for the people I fight for now is there was nobody coming through that door to help me that night. But,
it's one of the things I feel now that, well, I might not be able to stop it all, but I can make some impact. And that's exactly what you're doing. I'm so grateful for what you're doing.
Well, and I'm grateful for you, Joel. Honestly, it takes a village. Like at this point, I think the most recent statistics I've seen is almost over 40,000 kids right now in the United States foster care system. I'm in Oklahoma, and we're at almost 10,000 here, I think, alone, which is insanely high for.
Let me make sure I got that right. You said 40,000 nationwide.
400,000. Sorry, 400,000.
Yeah,
400,000. Sorry, and 10,000 here.
That was more than I could handle.
Yeah, just in Oklahoma. And it's just wild when you're thinking of so many children every night that are going without that support, and these kids are then going into school systems, and a lot of times these are the kids that are bullying other kids, or and I think it's just we just need to have a different level of understanding for kids and trauma, and how important a childhood really is, and how without one it really impacts your life forever.
It really does. And
let me ask both of you guys something. One of the themes that we address a lot here on the show, of course, we do a lot of really esoteric themes, but one of the themes that we address a lot is working on yourself to improve your own vibration, knowing that, or at least believing that, to the degree you're able to do that, you're also going to be affecting the vibration of others. This topic that we're talking about has very strong real world resonance to it in a pseudo terrifying way. And so it kind of presses the point and asks the question, does it actually make a difference in a situation like this? I mean, if I'm working on my vibration, am I really helping somebody who's going through that kind of a life? I'm just kind of curious to know what your perspectives are on that.
I mean, I think definitely. I mean, I talk all the time about how the importance of living in our authenticity helps inspire others. And I think that specifically falls on that, that vibrations level, when you're connected to yourself and you are showing people what that looks like and living in that looks like, and what happiness and true contentment and gratitude for where you are in your life, people will be like, gosh, you've been through so much. You've been through so many hard things. And like, you always just take it so well. And I'm like, no, but I know how to process it. And I know how to be intentional about the action that I take, maybe in a circumstance that I can't control. And so when you become that like beacon of light, for other people, you become an inspiration for others. And whether that's you directly teaching them or people just watching you go through that. But specifically when you're putting yourself out there in vulnerable populations on purpose, I think that's really the biggest way that we can help, is by helping those at the very bottom reach, the same starting line as everybody else. And I think that's the biggest thing that we can do, especially in the way that our world is right now. We may not have a lot of, control, but we can maximize our impact, and we can level up our leverage by living in that authenticity. And that's what I speak on. And I genuinely believe it works.
I mimic exactly what she's saying. And I believe when I go into a room, I believe my energy can influence a room. I think we bring that with us. I had a client tell his mom, like, she texted me afterwards. So he's been dealing with some depression and stuff. His dad had passed away. And so we had a really good session, really upbeat. It was really sad to start, but so he told his mom, she goes, man, you seem in a lot better mood. And he goes, it's really hard to be depressed around Joel. He said, he won't let me be depressed. so you raise that energy. So it is everything we do. It's not just what you're saying, but it's your energy itself that influences you. That we do influence a room when we walk in. The deal is, how do we influence it? And I pray. My goal is to raise the level of the room when I go in there, and it's something that it's intoxicating. It's a wonderful feeling. When somebody feels that, you're giving them, hey, I'll teach you how to do that. And that's
I think we've all known those people, right? Like, I think that everybody in your life, whether for me, it was like my second grade teacher that like I can vividly remember, who I just know was always a safe, loving, acceptable human who just cared about everybody. And she didn't show up any different than any other teacher that I had. She didn't have special assignments that were different than anybody else, but it was just the way that she was and the way that she loved people. And I think, you know, if we teach people, and that literally all of us can be like that if you step into that part of yourself, and then you truly do that. And I genuinely believe that's the only way that we're going to be able to see any change in the world as a whole, as if, you know, we work together and we learn how to reconnect with ourselves, and in turn learn how to reconnect with humanity and work together to change it.
As usual, we fly through an hour, and then I say to myself, can we have another one, please? Because that's exactly what this conversation has done. But I'll tell you, the thing I love is the way we're tying it up here, because you hear the story that you guys, and you guys were basically telling the same story. It's like you were jumping in on each other's story without walking over each other, saying, okay, and here's another piece of it, and here's another piece, here's another horror, here's another. And to know that at the end of the day, the work that each one of us individually does on ourselves actually contributes to solving a problem like this, that's incentive for me. I think it's incentive for a lot of people. Just knowing you're doing work on yourself, and by doing that, you're helping people you don't even know who are going through hell you don't even know. That's like, talk about having hope. That's where I say that's huge hope. If that really happens, oh my God.
I live it, see it, and live it every day. It does. Yeah.
That's fabulous.
I agree.
Well, Britt, we're going to have you back again sometime, because this is just a mind-blowing conversation to hear you guys go. And it really was one where I sat back and I said, wow, this is great. It's like watching the ultimate prize fight between two people who are fighting. They're actually contributing to the same thing. This is amazing. But thank you much for joining us, and we'll definitely arrange to have you back sometime and keep doing the work you're doing. It's really wonderful.
Well, thank you guys so much. The second time I've come on the show, I've loved it, and always up for another run, because we always have such a great time. So.
And thank you, Joel. As usual, you're being your usual Joelness, as the young man pointed out. It's impossible to be depressed around you. It just can't be done. You might be in the ADHD portion of the manual, but you're nowhere near the depression page. I can tell you that for sure.
Yeah, that's true.
So thank you.
I think that's one of those ADHD superpowers, though, when you're like, and everybody's like, oh my gosh, so much energy. Like they just like grab onto it.
Thank you, everybody. We'll see you all next time here on LOA Today. Goodbye, everybody.